Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is a 6-core Xeon W3680. I paid £20 for it and that wasn't a special deal or one-off price. These old 1366 CPUs are just really cheap. The most costly part of a Xeon setup in 2022 is the motherboard, though some models like the X58UD3R here cost a lot less than they did even just a couple of years ago. The key to unlocking the true potential of a Xeon is overclocking, and while that might sound scary to someone who's never done it before, this chip has an unlocked multiplier, so by changing this option in the BIOS, I can bring the speed of the W3680 up to 4 GHz from 3.33 with no other adjustments. It could go higher, I'm sure, but I'm all about simplicity, and so in pairing with an RTX 2080 Super and 24 gigs of basic triple channel 1333 MHz RAM, we're going to see how this super cheap processor handles modern games. As I jumped into Cyberpunk, I was very surprised by just how well the game ran. I was dreading the drive into downtown Night City, but actually, things held up pretty well. I set the crowd density option to low, as I always assume that this is quite a CPU intensive option, but the roads and pavements still look full of life, and if it means we can gain a few frames per second, then even better. The average frame rate was over 60 here, and even the 1.1% lows were respectable, with no nasty freezes or slowdown to report. The Badlands and generally emptier districts will perform even better, and I certainly wasn't expecting this to result in what is one of the most demanding games currently available. I've come to the conclusion before that Elden Ring, at least from my observations, doesn't much like older CPU architecture, either that or older RAM. I can't confirm anything because I haven't done enough testing, but the Xeon didn't do very well here. Actually, that's not really fair. It did okay, it is playable, but there were definitely noticeable frame drops which occurred more commonly in areas like this, with more foliage, just generally denser areas of the map, to be honest. It's still playable and somewhat enjoyable though. Now there isn't much to say about CSGO other than it runs pretty well. The 0.1% low could definitely be better, but I never noticed the game drop below 60 FPS, and according to the 1% figure, things held up pretty steady in that regard. Even if chips like the W3680 are cheap where you live, it is worth looking up the price of compatible motherboards before you buy one, because I know that 1366 socket boards can vary in price quite significantly from country to country. GTA 5 ran very well with almost 90 frames per second on average. All of the graphics options were set to very high, and the visual sliders, population density, etc. were maxed out. MSAA was off, but FXAA remained enabled. Despite some slowdown on paper, everything felt very smooth, and there were certainly no issues in that regard. GTA is getting on in years now, but it's still quite CPU intensive, especially with older chips, so seeing it run well on this old £20 $30 6-core is nice. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I stuck with the usual Xbox One X equivalent settings as provided by Digital Foundry, albeit without the 4K resolution of course. To my surprise, we were hitting 90 FPS on average, well, almost, with decent percentile lows as well. These figures were taken from the in-game benchmark run, which tests the game's performance across a handful of different in-game areas, including the bustling city of Saint Denis, and even then the frame rate held up pretty well. Red Dead is more than playable with the Xeon. You probably won't be pairing a 2080 Super with it like I've done. It's a bit overkill, but the Xeon should make a great pairing for an entry-level or mid-range graphics card. Forza Horizon 5 again gave us around 90 FPS, that seems to be a very popular figure today. There were a few dips and drops, but overall the game held steady, and it's safe to say that I have been more than impressed with the capabilities of this aging CPU. It was released in 2010, so the fact it supports all of today's games is one thing, but to run them well, that's pretty impressive. If I bought one of these new, I'd still see no reason to upgrade just yet. Maybe there's a few titles out there that won't run, I don't know, but I haven't found any as of my testing today. There are signs that this thing is over a decade old though, little clues that portray themselves through the gameplay, such as slightly lower than ideal percentile figures in certain titles. That said, in terms of PC hardware, this is what most would call an ancient, maybe even obsolete part, but that simply isn't the case. Unless you only want to play Elden Ring, then it's probably best avoided. As we finalise with Warzone, I think it's safe to conclude that for £20 or the equivalent in your chosen currency, this thing is worth the second-hand asking price all day long. It's just the cost of a decent 1366 motherboard, good cooler and triple channel DDR3 that you should factor in as well, because it might just be worth getting, say, a used 6-core Ryzen and a cheap A320 board instead with dual channel DDR4. It all depends as usual on the pricing where you live. Warzone, by the way, ran great, over 60 FPS all day long. To conclude, the W3680 is pretty impressive, especially when overclocked, which is effortless on the right board. The W3690 might be a bit better, but it's double the price here, and the 6-core i7s are also more expensive here in the UK. The W3680 has been great to play around with, and I'm very tempted to keep it just to see how long it holds up for. Then again, I might just buy another one in a few years' time and test it again, because they'll be even cheaper in another half-decade's time. Thank you very much for watching then. I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you did, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Let me know what you think of the Xeon below and whether or not you still use Xeon in 2022. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments section. Thanks again, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.